To tell us more about government response to the series of quakes in Mindanao and how to prepare for tremors like these, we have in the studio spokesperson of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, Mark Timbal. Good morning, Mark, and welcome to New Day once again.
Good morning.
All right, so what is the NDRRMC's latest assessment on the series of quakes that have hit Mindanao in the past few weeks in terms of fatality and injury count?
The assessment has actually started back after the October 16 earthquake, and this has been ongoing, and then there was a sort of interruption because of the Tuesday earthquake, October 29, and then another earthquake struck just yesterday morning. So with the computation as well as the count for damages are accumulating because of these succeeding earthquakes. On the part of the NDRMC, just this week, we have already sent out in advance relief items to support the supplies of the local governments. But this will remain standby in the regional centers, the regional disaster council, so that in case the local government stockpiles will prove unable to meet the demands of the entire evacuated population, these supplies will be immediately accessible for use.
All right, do we know at this point how many more people are missing?
So far, the operations are still ongoing for rescue. There are some buildings, as what was mentioned in your reports, there were some buildings that we haven't identified, the local rescuers haven't identified whether they were occupied in the first place or not. But what we are hoping here at the National is that since the earthquakes have been experienced since October 16, structures that have been identified as compromised would have been left vacant already.
I see. Okay. How many families are staying in evacuation centers, and what are the measures in place to assist them?
So far, as of our latest count, we have 12,760 persons who are staying in the different evacuation centers in Mindanao, in those affected areas. We have 19 evacuation centers that have been identified. So if you do the computation on this one, this totals to 2,552 families. We also have received reports that there are some families or persons who did not actually proceed to the evacuation centers. We understand that some families didn't want to leave their homes, so what they did was to camp out in a safe distance from their houses, but they're able to see their houses. This is due to the fear that their house may be burglarized in their absence. This amounted to 1,370 families. But all of these families, these evacuated individuals, are receiving assistance from the local governments.
Okay. Now, how does the NDRRMC respond to quake incidents like this? Especially for you on the national level, what are your priorities?
We have, in the Philippine DRRM system, or Disaster Risk Reduction and Management System, we have a leveling of response. Now, in all cases, it's the local governments that are the first responders. They have, even before an actual calamity happens, or a hazard for that matter, local governments should have made the necessary preparations. There are stockpiles of relief goods in their localities. They have equipment, they have personnel that have been trained for these purposes. If a hazard strikes and this already requires response beyond the actual preparations of the local governments, only then will they contact their provincial governments, the regional disaster councils, and the national disaster council for assistance. But as we can see right now, the local governments are very active in managing the local emergencies in their area. But because of the continuing earthquakes, it appears that their resources are almost stretched thin in this case. So they have started asking assistance to the regional regional disaster councils.
Okay, so nasa level na sila ng regional. After that, it would be national, if ever.
But the national government has already sent out in advance relief support. Yesterday, the response cluster of the NDRRMC had already convened. We have received confirmation from DSWD that relief items such as food packs temporary shelters have already been delivered in Mindanao, and another batch is currently on its way. We have commissioned, DSWD has commissioned trucking services. If I'm not mistaken, yesterday the trucks bearing this relief support are already in Visayas. So they will be reaching Mindanao soon.
All right, so we know that we cannot predict earthquakes,
True.
but the best we can do is to be prepared for them. And I know that your agency, together with the MMDA and the local governments, are all working together, holding shake drills and the like. So tell us again about the 4 quadrants the public can go to if ever there are tremors.
Well, here in Metro Manila, the Metro Manila Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, with the assistance of the National Council and other agencies, have developed the Metro Manila Earthquake Contingency Plan. And one of the notable points of this plan is the projection that if a 7.2 magnitude earthquake hits the metro, some parts of Metro Manila will be isolated from one another because of the possible collapse of bridges and damages to the major road networks. So Metro Manila will be divided into 4 quadrants. The eastern quadrant will be composed of Marikina City and Pasig City. The southern quadrant will be composed of the cities of Pasay, Makati, Parañaque, Las Piñas, Muntinlupa, Pateros, and Taguig. The western quadrant will be composed of the city of Manila, Navotas, and Malabon. And the northern quadrant will have Caloocan, Valenzuela, San Juan, Mandaluyong, and Quezon City. Now, these quadrants will have their own command centers and major evacuation sites. So for the northern quadrant, which is composed of Quezon City and the cities I mentioned, this will be the Veterans Memorial Medical Center golf course. For the eastern quadrant, we'll have the LRT2 Santolan Station, Santolan Depot, sorry. And in the southern quadrant, we'll have the Villamor Air Base Golf Course as a command center and evacuation center. And for the western quadrant, we have the Intramuros Golf Course. Now, it's noticeable in this plan that these areas that had been identified are open spaces.
Right.
The earthquakes don't really kill. What kills is the collapse of structures if people get hurt by falling debris. If you noticed in the list of casualties as well as the injuries that had been sustained by our people, majority of that are due to falling debris, and there's a percentage of heart attack, cardiac arrest. What the local governments are doing now are pre-identifying safe spaces, open spaces that the citizens can go to in their own areas of jurisdiction. So this is not just the responsibility of government. Citizens should be aware of those safe places in their area so that they can immediately go to those spaces if an earthquake strikes.
All right. Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. We understand this is probably a very busy time for you. All right. That was NDRMC spokesperson Mark Timbal.